This is Cassius with Era of Wisdom, and I'm here with Peter Kirby, the author of the book Chemtrails Exposed, a New Manhattan Project. And he's going to give us some perspective on geoengineering, chemtrails, the exact individuals and entities behind it today, the people involved in creating the fields of weather modification, and much more. So how are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, what experiences compelled you to get involved with this? What, made you want to speak out about chemtrails and geoengineering?
Well, it was something that was unavoidable. I had been, of course, aware of certain conspiracies my whole life. Once I became aware of 9/11, that just opened the floodgates. And because I started paying attention to the new media after that, and hearing all these different stories that people had to say, and at first I didn't believe the chemtrail thing, but over time I realized that this was the case, and it was so unacceptable to me because I couldn't avoid it. The 9/11 conspiracy. I don't live in Manhattan. Call me selfish, but it wasn't something that I saw as like a clear and present danger to me, to my body. In a lot of ways, I think of myself as quite selfish in that, I didn't do anything about any of these things until I was directly attacked. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was going to go on a crusade about, this or that or the other thing, all these things that, don't affect me directly. But when I realized that I was under attack, that we are all under attack by this, I have no alternative but to fight it. It's just one of those things that it's just totally unacceptable to be assaulted on a daily basis, in this way, and that was what spurred me on, and that's what continues to spur me on.
That's as real as it gets, man. That's a similar experience to what I had. I knew about it before 2016, but what happened at the beginning of 2016, exactly 1 year ago, was here in Sacramento, California, for anybody that doesn't know. Well, there was just an escalation of activity in January, February, and especially March of last year. And this escalation compelled me to research it and to learn exactly what it is, try to learn who is doing it. And one of the most compelling things I came across were your interviews with James Corbett. So I eventually got your book, and I got into researchers like Dane Wigington and you and all the other people doing great work on it. And a person, Patrick Roddy from Stop Spraying Us San Francisco, he got rain tests from Sacramento performed at the same time when I witnessed the worst spraying that I've ever seen in my life, and that was 4,700 micrograms per liter of aluminum in Sacramento rain. I took, video of the worst chemtrails I've ever seen. I woke up and I smelled it because, earlier last year, this smell started to build up in my house. It was this powdery, starchy, extremely irritating smell, and if I got close to the dust in my house, it would give me flu-like symptoms. So, I started experiencing that, and it became, like you said, just the forefront of my priority. It became an immediate issue, and it's a much different thing from focusing on something that's detached from you compared to focusing on something that's an immediate, in-your-face threat.
Yeah, I'm not sure if other people are experiencing this, but I tend to notice that there is more dust in general just around my house. Things seem to get dusty, with alarming frequency, and that is where things build up in houses. It's very well known that if you have a house that's near, say, a chemical plant or an oil refinery, the chemicals that are emitted by these factories, they end up lodging in the house and accumulating in people's houses, and all the houses, you know, in the vicinity of these chemical plants and oil refineries and whatnot. The houses become totally toxic, and you got to tear them down and stuff. You know, it just becomes just an unwinnable situation. You know.
Wow, I didn't know about that. I know about mercury from coal production and coal fly ash. Speaking of coal fly ash, that's, you know, what Marvin J. Herndon suspects might be a base material for geoengineering stuff, of course. But yeah, that's a good point. It's just so crazy. I don't know how people can't smell it in their houses, or, you know, because that's one of the most important tools that I have for knowing when to protect myself from that. I can smell it. But some people I've noticed just can't smell it at all. They seem to be completely numb to smelling it. I don't understand that. But one thing that I've noticed was when they started spraying earlier this year at an incredible increased frequency, I thought, you know, what can I do about this? So Brandon Turbeville and I wrote an article called The Geoengineering Escalation of 2016. And we noticed that the Google searches for chemtrails skyrocketed in April 2016. So how can anyone account for a statistical, you know, rise in people Google searching chemtrails when there was little, you know, there's nothing but an increased spraying? That's the only thing that could have caused that to happen.
Well, there was the death of Prince as well. I think you wrote an article about that.
Oh, right, there was that. Yeah, actually, that's another factor too. Yeah, I did write about that.
Well, you know, one of the funny things is that my wife's coming home right now if you hear some noise. But one of the funny things is that now, you know, I've been searching ever since you wrote that article. I've been searching the term chemtrails on Google Trends with regularity to see where it's going. And the last few times that I've gone and searched for the term chemtrails on Google Trends is it just gives me an error message. It says cannot do that or something, and it shows this broken robot and stuff. And I've tried it multiple times with like different browsers and stuff. I don't know what's up with that.
Wow, are you serious? I haven't noticed that. Damn.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to give it a shot and then see if they've just, you know, completely blacklisted the term. You know, it just makes me want to hit that term harder. You know, because when I started researching this stuff, there were some people, and there continue to be people in the movement saying, don't use the term chemtrails, it discredits us. Use, you know, persistent contrail or something like that. I refuse to do that because, you know, we as humans are forming the way that we communicate about these things. And the best word that we've come up with is chemtrail. It's a chemical trail that comes out of the plane. It's not a contrail. You know, a contrail is something that dissipates very quickly. It has nothing to do with contrails. These are chemical trails.
I agree with your unwillingness to compromise the term because regardless of how people feel about it, that's exactly right. It's a chemical trail. And furthermore, you know, there have been chemical trails that have been sprayed that have nothing to do with even geoengineering. Biological warfare, you could say that the Agent Orange spraying was chemtrails too because it was chemical trails. And, you know, I personally think that they can disguise biowarfare, disguise anything else they want to spray on us in the mix of geoengineering. So in the future,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what they've been trying to do the whole time. I mean, this is the whole reason behind, you know, Keith and Caldera and all the rest of them coming out saying that, well, it might be a good idea. They're just trying to legitimize the idea that, you know, planes can just fly over emitting all kinds of crap, you know, whatever they want.
That sets an incredibly dangerous precedent that we cannot allow to be set. If they openly spray, you know, for people that don't already know, can you explain what the CIA director proposed that the government do, who David Keith is, and all that stuff?
Yeah, these are the bad guys on the front lines. These are the you know, most prominent enemies that we're facing right now on this issue. All of these people that come out and advocate for this garbage. The CIA director, what's his name again?
John
he's
Brennan.
just another, yeah, he's just another clown who you know, comes out and spouts the same garbage that's been coming out of the government's orifice since 1965 with a document from the LBJ White House called Restoring the Quality of Our Environment. You know, the Orwellian titled document, Restoring the Quality of Our Environment, when actually what they're talking about is spraying things out of planes and wrecking the quality of our environment. And no, he's just a tool that comes out, and the CIA has a long history of, they're very political. They have a long history of just deceiving the American public. There was a 1974 report that I mentioned in my last interview with Corbett, where it appears that they produced this report in 1974, which was the fount of the whole idea that global warming could, cause the extinction of humanity. All this fear mongering about it. They've been fear mongering about global warming for many, many decades. And, the theory of man-made global warming ties into this because, the geoengineering thesis is that, hey, we need to spray things out of planes to save you from global warming. Watch out. That global warming is terrible. Don't let that get you. They're saying there's this big, existential meanie over here that has to be quelled. So, and then, well, the geoengineers are here. Oh, they're going to save us. Oh, they're just going to spray things. And, they're just creating this whole false narrative as a cover story for what I call the New Manhattan Project.
Absolutely, and that's so important to understand because basically what you uncovered with your research in your book is that, well, one of the things is that the theory of climate change or global warming, its earliest mentions are in the context of manipulating the weather. So geoengineering, manipulating the weather, spraying things to manipulate the weather, that, climate change and global warming originated in the context of that. So
well, let me give you some new information on that.
Right.
The earliest in the book, the earliest mention that I had found was 1958. Yeah, or wait, was it? 1958. 1958. It was all these. It was 2 or 3 prominent documents came out about the theory of man-made global warming and the SRM geoengineering thesis. I really think going forward, I should be concentrating not on the theory of man-made global warming, but more on tracing the geoengineering thesis. But anyway, I've been able to find earlier mentions of the SRM geoengineering thesis, and it's significant because it was John von Neumann. I'm not sure if you pronounce it John von Neumann or John von Neumann. I've heard different versions of it. The famous mathematician, right. And he proposed the SRM geoengineering thesis a year earlier in 1957. I just read a biography about him, and this is very interesting because John von Neumann was looked upon in the scientific community as a demigod. I mean, he died young. Probably due to radiation poisoning. He was exposed to things. He worked on the original Manhattan Project, but he, as far as I can tell, of all the biographies I've been reading, all the things I've been reading about the Manhattan Project and big science, and we're in the World War II era and all this stuff, John von Neumann was like their leader. He was like their cult leader. I mean, they absolutely. He was very sharp, very intelligent, and very useful to the military-industrial academic complex. And he was a big proponent of the theory of man-made global warming. And it looks to me like he may have been the one to come up with the SRM geoengineering thesis.
Wow, that's incredibly insightful. So,
this is what I'm working on right now.
Perfect, man. I can't wait to see the results of that. So
yeah, the article is going to be called, I think it's going to be probably a couple months. The article is going to be called Truly a New Manhattan Project. I'm tracing the transition from the original Manhattan Project to the new Manhattan Project. They rolled out the beginning of the scientific era of weather modification in late 1946. Well, they dropped the bomb in August of 1945. So there's a small time frame there. And see, what I think really happened was that they created this giant military industrial academic complex to come up with new technologies to defeat the enemy during World War II. And then once the war was over, I think they kind of said to themselves, either consciously or subconsciously, hey, we just put together this giant apparatus that can do all these things and, end war and, save humanity and all this. What are we going to do with it? And I think the answer was, let's go about controlling the weather.
I really like the way you say military, industrial, academic complex, because it really does go back to these prestigious academic institutions, some of which were founded by the industrial titans who influenced, things most profoundly in this 20th century, like the Carnegie institutions. And
oh, absolutely, you're right there. And that's it, the Carnegie Institution.
Yeah.
Yep.
What can you say about them?
Well, I'm in the process of trying to figure on more of their role here. But the guy who put together, there was one guy in particular who basically assembled the military industrial academic complex. That was Vannevar Bush. His name is pronounced strangely. People usually call him Vannevar Bush because that's how it's pronounced phonetically. But his actual pronunciation of his name is Vannevar Bush. And I believe he was the head of the Carnegie Foundation. See, I'm in the process of doing this. I'm pretty sure he was the head of the Carnegie Foundation, but that name, the Carnegie Foundation, comes up over and over again in the context of weather modification and the atmospheric sciences.
Wow, that's incredibly insightful. David Keith, of course, comes from Harvard, and you mentioned in the book that there seems to be a centering of these people that are involved in geoengineering in Boston or Massachusetts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's MIT.
MIT.
It's MIT.
The Institutes of Technology.
MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has been the research and development center of the New Manhattan Project from the beginning. And, if you also read the book, you see that I say that the MITRE Corporation is probably the group that is the organization that is tasked with overseeing the day-to-day operations, managing the New Manhattan Project. And it is a matter of historical fact that the MITRE Corporation came out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I think it is sort of a mystery as to what MITRE stands for, M-I-T-R-E. What I think it stands for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Radiation Experiment.
Wow, that's incredibly insightful. I remember you mentioned them on the Corbett interview, the second one you did.
Oh, it's the Boston area. There's no doubt about it. That has been the research and development center of the New Manhattan Project. See, what I think happened was that they basically developed the basic science and many of the devices and apparatus and things in the Boston area. And then I also assert in the book that the the number one command and control center is probably located at Lawrence Livermore National Labs. So, they did the dirty work over there on the East Coast and then sort of poured it all into Lawrence Livermore National Labs. And if you want me to continue further with that, I can disclose more about what's in the paper that's coming up. The founder of he wasn't the founder. He was a director of Lawrence Livermore National Labs, Edward Teller. Now, I've read 2 books about Edward Teller and 2 books by Edward Teller. And Edward Teller looks to me like maybe the most important scientist in the New Manhattan Project. He talks about modifying the weather persistently throughout his books. And he notes in his memoirs, in a footnote, he mentions that he was a longtime consultant to the MITRE Corporation. He didn't talk too much about that, but yes, he admits in his memoirs that he served as a longtime consultant to none other than the MITRE Corporation, oddly enough.
Wow, that's exactly what I want to hear, man. What I want to hear is who is responsible for it today? The MITRE Corporation, you've got...
That's where we aim all our figurative guns, is at the MITRE Corporation. I mean, I have no other better place for people to invest their research and their time. I'm not doing that right now because I'm trying to gather the whole story together before I go forward with things like, freedom of information requests and, really dissecting certain organizations and really following through and exhausting every avenue of research that I can. But if people out there want to just go for the throat, go for the MITRE Corporation.
Perfect. So we've got the MITRE Corporation involved in geoengineering today. We've got Lawrence Livermore Labs. What can you tell us about the Department of Defense, Raytheon, DARPA, General Electric, NOAA, or NOAA, and the World Meteorological Organization? How are they involved in geoengineering today?
Well, that's a lot of organizations. They all serve different purposes. Let's start with NOAA, the last one that you mentioned, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. What I think their role in all this is today is I think that they manage the economic aspects of this program. I believe in the book I mentioned a study that was conducted by NOAA where they start quantifying economic activity that can be enhanced by weather modification activities. This is I believe that this report came out late 50s, in the 60s, maybe early 60s, something like that. But it looks to me like all these different organizations and different corporations, they all have their own little facets of things. And then GE's role in it today is very perplexing to me. I cannot discern what they're doing exactly. I know, and I'm reading a great book about this right now, how involved they were in the rollout of the scientific era of weather modification in 1946 with Irving Langmuir, Vincent Schaefer, and Bernard Vonnegut. That is very well known that they were extremely interested in weather control and started working with our military to accomplish these things. But as far as what it may be, I think the most probable thing that GE is involved in today is probably stuff to do with the ionospheric heaters, with the electromagnetic portions of this program. But I think the most important player in the electromagnetic portions of the new, exactly, Raytheon. I mean, Raytheon is just, there's so many connections there, it just boggles the mind. I mean, they acquired Hughes Aerospace, which the evidence shows that Hughes has been a tremendous vehicle for mostly for the production of technology that has gone into the New Manhattan Project. There's research, development, and production, and different organizations, different groups will handle these different aspects. Hughes was more like someplace like a factory. And that's why you see that picture in my book of William Francis Raborn visiting the production line in a Hughes factory. And we all know, if you've read what I've written about William Francis Raborn, we all know that he looks like a very, very big wheel in the New Manhattan Project, and specifically the development of the electromagnetic energy portions of the program. And what were some of those other organizations you wanted to know about?
We've got Raytheon covered, NOAA. Before we continue, I'd just like to clarify for anybody that doesn't know, Peter is referring to the practice of using electromagnetic energy to basically steer weather systems and do things in the ionosphere to alter the weather. So this electromagnetic aspect of it is what goes hand in hand with spraying to geoengineer the weather.
It's the distinguishing facet of this. It's the thing that distinguishes this from the traditional cloud seeding industry more than any other aspect.
Right, perfect. So the other organizations are, the government organizations, of course, DoD, DARPA, and just basically any other people that you think are involved with it today.
Okay. DoD and DARPA. Well, DoD runs DARPA. The Department of Defense is above the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This is the hierarchy, I believe. And so the DoD, would just be largely an administrative, would serve an administrative function in all of this. But DARPA would be more into the development of the technologies. They've been there in the weather modification and atmospheric sciences space for as long as there's been a space, for as long as since they created the space in 1946. And so the hierarchy would be the Department of Defense, and then below them DARPA, and then below them the MITRE Corporation. And I'd like to add something that's not in the book that will be in the second edition. I believe above the Department of Defense, you're looking at NATO. I think you're looking at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization above the Department of Defense, and then above NATO, I think it's the UN. There were in the book. I just go straight from the DoD to something called the Committee of 300, but I think the NATO and the UN are in between the Department of Defense and the Committee of 300. I think that it has to be NATO. It has to be, well, yeah, I think it is the UN, but it has to be NATO. Who else, what other military organization can freely move between borders of countries? There is no other group.
Absolutely, that makes perfect sense. So you're saying that NATO, these international government organizations, they basically are involved in setting up geoengineering programs or somehow getting geoengineering to go on in countries in Europe, Spain. What I've noticed is that you can find on YouTube several videos of chemtrail spraying in Turkey. And there were even some people who were, Turkish professors and people speaking about it on Turkish news stations. And that fits perfectly with what the former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, said about Iran being droughted out, because he specifically described how the rain current moves from west to east in Iran. So he said that technology from the west of Iran, aka Turkey, the Mediterranean, is causing drought in Iran. So it seems that Ahmadinejad was talking about spraying going on in Turkey and in that area to cause the drought in Iran.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised if Iran is actually not participating in this global weather modification project, as many other countries, not just the U.S., many other countries around the world are participating in it. And I would speculate that it is largely because they don't have a Federal Reserve Bank, run by the banksters. That's why there's been such a concentration on Iran. They're the big bad guys, so terrible. They haven't kneeled before Sauron, apparently, and so they may be just catching the brunt, or getting the rear end of this thing. That's just a little bit of speculation, but it seems to me that almost every country in the world has some type of weather modification thing going on. But if the countries are around them, and Turkey has been bankster run, they've recently aligned themselves with Russia, which, in my opinion, is not bankster run. But that's basically a political revolution that's gone on in Turkey of late. But this is very recently. So in recent years, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they were just getting jacked around with these global weather modification project activities that everybody else around them is doing, but they're not doing.
Absolutely. So after the coup attempt in Turkey earlier this year, which supposedly the Turkish multinational who, well, that's a little bit off topic, but anyway, I've noticed that.
No, there's lots of stuff going on there. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a big meal to eat right there.
big can of worms. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
so I know that geoengineering sometimes occurs in Peru and Chile and even the places in South America that I once thought might be safe from this kind of thing. But it's strongly going on in Chile, it's happening in Peru. I mean, I don't know a South American country where it's not happening. For
Right.
some reason, Mexico seems to, in some places, have much less geoengineering activity than other places. I don't know why that is.
Well, to participate in this global weather modification project, you need quite a bit of technology. You need quite a bit of know-how. You need, an advanced society. That's why, the more industrialization you get, the more of the new Manhattan Project you get, the more industrialized the country is, the more chemtrails they get. That's just the way it is. But let's talk about California and how California is being affected by this.
Absolutely. So, what I'd like to ask about California is why do you think they want to drought out California so bad? Because, the way they spray, I mean, I'm telling people from heartfelt personal experience. They're spraying every day here. I can personally say that my room is closed off from the rest of the house, but the rest of the house, it's filled with the smell. I try to hold my breath when I leave this space. I'm going to leave this place soon because it's too much. I've left earlier this year to go to Washington State and then Texas to get away from this, and it's much better in other places. But when I came back here to work on the documentary, I had to endure it for a little while. But I'm ready to get out of here again because I don't have that much of a connection to any place, but it's just so bad here. It's killing people. You can smell it. The lobby of a bank that you go into that has like the ATM before you get in the double doors. Well, that lobby smells like chemtrails around here, and you can smell it in the air. For some reason, the rain is bringing it right now. We've gotten a lot of rain here, but it used to be to where the rain took it out of the air, and the rain would be a sign that you wouldn't smell it. But now, the rain is bringing it specifically. So I'd like to ask, why are they constantly spraying California, and why are they apparently trying to cause a drought?
California is just in the way, basically. Okay, California is the first, or actually the whole Pacific, the western coast of America. I don't think you're going to get much relief in Washington or Oregon, because what's happening here is that the most moisture that America sees comes off of the Pacific Ocean. With the air that comes off of the Pacific Ocean is generally just full of atmospheric water, and this new Manhattan Project, as it pertains to the United States, and actually everywhere that it's done, it's mostly about distribution of water. Distribution of water. It's taken me quite a while to come to this conclusion, but what it's mostly about is at least the weather modification aspects of it. There are other things going on, and I have a chapter in the book called other agendas, but the book's right here. But the weather modification aspects of the new Manhattan Project are about water distribution. And what they're doing is, as this moisture comes in off of the Pacific, they're spraying us very heavily along the western Pacific coast of America, because they're sequestering that water. They're getting it attached to these tiny little particles in the air. They're sucking it up like a giant sponge or a giant paper towel, and they once they have those particles, the nuclei that are that have the water on them, they get those little particles under the control of the electromagnetic energy, and then they can move it. They can put it up into the jet stream. They can sort of push it this way. They can push it that way. And I wouldn't be surprised if they also can hit it with certain frequent electromagnetic frequencies that will make it rain out wherever they want to make it rain out. And a large reason why I've come to this conclusion is that you've heard this idea that water is the new gold and things like that. But the weather modifiers were making an absolute killing off of hydroelectric power. And this is mentioned in the book. This was one of the things that they figured out very early on. And it was either late 40s or the early 50s. These power companies, most notably PG&E here in Northern California, and then Southern California, Edison down there in the Southland, and something called a Bonneville Power Authority up in the Washington area. They jumped all over this thing because they saw that when they seeded clouds with silver iodide, they were seeing on average returns of 10 to 1. For every dollar they would spend, they would see $9 or $10 back on a short-term basis. I mean, this is absolutely unheard of in the world of large corporations. And so, they have been just jumping all over this. And I think you can throw in water districts. Local water districts are also involved in this. I have not figured out exactly how they are involved, but water is life. Water, does everything for us. It makes the plants grow. It generates hydroelectric power. I mean, it makes cities grow. We need it all the time. Water is very important. And I think that that's why they're spraying California. They need to suck up that water and redistribute it to the rest of America. So the drought in California is, in my opinion, largely a byproduct of just sucking the moisture that we're supposed to be getting, sucking it out of our atmosphere and giving it to other people so that they can have their financial gain.
Makes perfect sense, man. I've noticed with my firsthand experience that every time it's about to rain, before it rains, they spray as much as they possibly can, and then, it even seems that they're spraying directly onto the rain clouds now, because the rain brings such a strong smell of it that it only makes sense to believe that now they've chosen to spray onto it. They weren't doing that several months ago.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you, Cassius, that it used to be that a storm front would be coming in and then you'd see all the chemtrails and everything. But once it started raining, it was like, relief. It washed all the chemtrails. They stopped spraying and stuff.
Exactly.
But now we just had these storms that they came in. And I was having all the same symptoms as though there was, as though they were spraying. Of course, I couldn't see it because, it was just a cloud bank overhead. But I was having the dryness in my nasal passage, the shortness of breath, the taste, the smell. And I saw something very interesting yesterday. How when a storm is clearing out, you'll get, let's say 25 years ago when a storm was clearing out, you get just, the little puffy clouds and just blue in the background is a beautiful thing. When a storm clears, you see that the little white puffy clouds is just, picturesque and everything. Now, what I saw yesterday and what I've been seeing quite a lot of is that there's the little puffy clouds, and then higher up there's more cloud cover. And,
it's layered.
To me, it's unnatural. Yeah, the cloud cover that's higher up is something that they're spraying. And not only that, yesterday, when we had the storm clearing out, there was another storm coming in that night. So we had the puffy clouds, and then the layer of clouds above them, and they were different colors. The white puffy clouds, I had always thought that when they're spraying it, it makes it look kind of brown, kind of brownish, like a coppery tone.
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell if you don't have things to contrast it against. But yesterday I had the white puffy clouds; those were white, and then the higher cloud cover, and you could tell by contrasting the two that the higher cloud cover was definitely brownish colored. And I think that's the color of the spray.
Man, that makes perfect sense. So for anyone that doesn't know, you're in San Rafael, north of San Francisco, correct?
Yes, Marin County.
Okay, so we're both in Northern California, and for everyone listening, we're both witnessing a storm that's been, going across Northern California, a ton of rain in Northern California, and so both of us have had the same firsthand experience that rain used to bring relief from this. They would apparently find it not necessary to spray onto the rain because I guess it would just rain no matter what. But now the rain is bringing the smell of it and the symptoms, and we're experiencing symptoms. So, well, have you ever recognized the smell of it? Because one strange thing that I've noticed is that some people seem to be dead to be able to smell it, but I can recognize it in an instant. It smells, earlier this year, or last year, it smelled like a starchy, powdery, metallic type of smell. But then in July, it changed, and it became much sharper, plastic, and much more potent and irritating. It smells now that it's plasticky and different. It smells exactly like static electricity. It smells precisely like a plastic slide at a playground. So, do you smell anything from it?
No, I think you're right about the added smell. It is a little. I think you're right. It is a little different, and I think that's a very astute observation. I think that there is. It does smell a little more plasticky. I think you're right about that.
Perfect. So I'm glad that you can smell it because it's kind of a scary thing to know that some people, that's the most valuable tool we can have to detect if we need to protect ourselves, if we enter a room, or if we know that we need to do something. My sense of smell is my single most valuable tool to know that I should protect myself from it. It was coming in, for some reason, the rain would bring it through all the windows in the house. I started making it to where we never open the windows, we never keep the doors open, anything like that. We're disciplined about that. But the rain makes it go right through the walls of the house to make it to where if you keep the window shut, it doesn't matter, it's coming in the house now. So that's the largest downside of the fact that the rain is bringing it, in my opinion. I had to put more layers on my window to make sure it didn't come in my room.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like you're taking precautions to maintain your sense of smell. Are you, taking turmeric or some other things that are unclogging your senses?
Not that particular thing, but what I do take is I drink water with diatomaceous earth in it to remove aluminum from the body because silica.
That works.
Yeah, silica does. And I take selenium in case there's mercury in my body, and also because I've had mercury amalgam fillings in the past, and that's good for that. And I take zinc and magnesium. I eat lemons, and my girl has been teaching me a lot about health, so a lot of that good stuff this year.
You're detoxifying.
Absolutely.
Is the bottom. You're detoxifying. You're flushing this stuff out of your system. Most people don't even know what's going on. So, they're just breathing in all this crap and it's just clogging up their senses. And, once you get, what do they call it? Accumulated? No, accustomed to it, acclimated. That's the word.
Acclimated, yeah.
Once you get acclimated to just being assaulted by this and just, having this stuff in your system all the time, it becomes normal and you don't notice it anymore. It's only people like you and I who are aware of what's going on, who take the precautions to unclog their senses, who can even perceive this.
Absolutely. And you know what's another strange observation I've made? This new mix, I've seen it give people gastrointestinal problems and diarrhea and things like that. And what I've found is that whenever I'm exposed to spraying for too long, I make a point to drink water with diatomaceous earth in it, food grade diatomaceous earth.
Yes, water is key. Water is key. Everybody who talks about these things says that you have to have a good supply of water. I mean, before I even knew about the chemtrail thing, I was always carrying around a water bottle with me. And it was actually something that started around the time that the chemtrails started being sprayed. I started just intuitively. I didn't even know what was going on, but I just felt like I always wanted to, quench my thirst all the time. So I've been carrying a water bottle around me with me of some sort for like 20 years now. It wasn't something I did as a kid, but yeah, the water, you need to have your fluids, being able to, all your bodily juices and things. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know all the technical terms, but you need to have that moistness about you. You need to have that fluidity. You need to have your glands to continue to function and continue to purge these things out of your body. Your body can't do it if you don't give it the right tools.
Absolutely. So, yeah, for anyone that wants to better their health and protect from this, my best advice from what I've learned so far is that food-grade diatomaceous earth is one of the best things that I've found. I have a glass 5-gallon water jug that I fill up with water every few days, and that's the water that I drink out of. And I have a big glass cup that I drink water out of, and I put diatomaceous earth in it, and it doesn't taste like anything. The water looks a little bit white, but it tastes fine. It tastes great. And
yeah, I've had it before. It tastes fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
No
another thing is that, to my understanding, well, also we're overloaded with aluminum, and I don't know how often mercury is found in rain tests from chemtrails. I don't know how prevalent that is. I'd imagine it's minor, but just in case, what a lot of these toxic metals do is they disrupt processes and enzymes in cells, and they get into your cells, and they, instead of zinc or magnesium, one of these toxic metals will bind to a receptor site in a cell and mess it up. When the body doesn't have selenium, it uses mercury in cells in place of selenium, and health problems occur from this. So minerals, diatomaceous earth, this can protect people from the spray.
Yeah, and as far as the elites of this world who are in on this, and who have told their families about what's going on and all this type of stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if some type of concoction has been made specifically for them, for them to take on a daily basis. Let's say you're a guy who knows about the project and has been informed about it. Let's say you're a member of the committee of 300 or something, and you want to protect your family. I could picture somebody like that just being provided with some type of concoction, just maybe a little bottle that they just put a drop or two in their water every day, and they could, the father could just go to them and say, we just want you to take this every day. They don't even have to tell them about why or what's going on or anything like that. They could just say, like, just protect yourself, please. Just trust me. Just take this every day, and that, or pill that they take every day or something like that. If you know exactly what toxins you're being exposed to, like if they know exactly of what the chemtrail spray consists, then you can produce something that would most efficiently counteract those toxins.
I'd say that's a very realistic way to look at it. Absolutely. That's pretty much the way I've imagined they respond to it, because they get sprayed a little bit too. I don't think as much as some areas, but definitely the powerful people do get sprayed too, and they must have some kind of way that they protect themselves from it. So the next direction that I want to go in is biowarfare. So in the documentary that we produced at Era of Wisdom, Toddlers on Amphetamine, History of Big Pharma and the Major Players, we documented the history of biowarfare, some of the history. The experiments spraying bacteria on the residents of San Francisco, Operation Sea Spray, the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, all these biowarfare experiments.
Hundreds of them. There's hundreds of them.
Tons and tons.
And that's just what we know about.
Yeah, for decades and decades, just as there's a documentable extensive history of weather modifications. So my opinion is that as the CIA Director John Brennan proposed last year, as David Keith of Harvard and other geoengineers are proposing, the mainstream media is openly talking about spraying aluminum, barium, and strontium in the sky to, quote, protect against climate change. So we know that the earliest origin of talk of climate change or global warming is in the context of manipulating the weather. So we have a good picture that the global warming climate change thing is to try to get them or get the public to accept openly spraying the skies to modify the weather. But my concern is that they say, okay, we're going to start geoengineering the weather now. We're going to commence geoengineering. If they can spray something in the sky, then they can spray anything in the sky. They can spray any kind of biological material on us they want to do anything to us imaginable. So that's the most dangerous precedent set that we can imagine, you know, openly spraying the skies. So I've come across these academic papers from Israel Institute of Technology and a few other places recently. You know, the institutes of technology are big into all this stuff, of course. Well, they came out with some papers, about 10 papers actually. Not just them, but several other academic institutions, especially concentrated in Israel, about electrospun nanofibers containing bacteria and viruses. These academics and scientists say they have made electrospun nanofibers that contain bacteria and viruses, and they say they want to spray electrospun nanofibers containing nitrogen-fixing bacteria onto crops. So we have a problem with nitrogen deficiency in soil because of mad science, because of pesticide use and all these biotech, you know, bad agriculture practices. So they want to cure the damage to soil done by mad science in the first place with more mad science, spraying nitrogen-fixing bacteria from placed into electrospun nanofibers onto crops. They say they want to remove the pesticide atrazine from water supplies by introducing bacteria placed into electrospun nanofibers into water supplies to destroy the pesticide. So this is just what we see right now. What do you think about the future of biowarfare and spraying?
Well, what you're talking about right there reminds me of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, where, you know, they released something that's, you know, it's not good for the environment. Of course, an oil spill is bad. You know, it can be terrible for the environment. But at least, you know what? At least oil is a product of the earth, and is that there's actually lots of little sea creatures, what do they call them, microbes, and little microscopic things that actually eat the oil. And you can produce these and, you know, naturally get rid of oil spills and things. I mean, instead, what they did was spray the Corexit on it, which just made it worse. Just made it sink to the bottom, made it super toxic, and all this. Yeah, they're constantly making a bad situation worse with their so-called solutions. But yeah, the whole biowarfare aspect of it, you know, thank God that bioweapons are expensive, because if they were cheap, you bet that they'd be loading the planes up with them. The little problem for them is that it's generally super expensive to create these, you know, cutting edge, high tech nanofibers and, you know, polymers or whatever, and all this type of stuff. If what I think is happening, then, you know, they're going with something cheap. They're going with coal fly ash, which is, you know, cheap, readily available, and apparently can be used for their purposes. And I would also hazard to speculate that if they want to get inside our bodies and manipulate our biological functions in the manner of biowarfare, I think that they could actually use just the coal fly ash particles accumulated in our bodies, and then manipulate those particles with electromagnetic energy, with certain frequencies that would produce certain effects. And you know, the coal fly ash, I believe, would have to be reconstituted. You know, they're not just going to be just taking straight coal fly ash and just, you know, powder and just, having it disperse out of the plane. I think, first of all, they have to turn it into a liquid, which would be much easier to transport and to store and to eventually disperse from the planes, because it's got to go through tubing and things. And a liquid's going to be a lot better at doing something like that. So if they have to reconstitute it anyway, why not do something in the process that would make it so that this reconstituted coal fly ash would be something that would interact more effectively with electromagnetic energy in order to accomplish manipulation of our bodies, as I suggest.
That makes perfect sense, For anybody that doesn't know, there's a hypothesis that was put forward by a nuclear physicist from San Diego named J. Marvin Herndon. He wrote a paper theorizing that the base material for much of what is sprayed is basically coal fly ash that has been changed in some way. So that seems like a very reasonable hypothesis. And
for people who don't know what coal fly ash is, it's the ash that rises when you burn coal. There's other stuff that stays in the bottom, and they call that bottom ash or something.
Right.
And our government has mandated that coal fly ash be actively, physically removed from the smokestacks of coal-fired power plants since the late 1970s. So there's a massive availability of the coal fly ash. It's very, very cheap, and it's been accumulating since for many decades now.
And there was a YouTuber that I can't find now, but there was a man in Atlanta, an older man, that claims that train cars full of coal fly ash were headed towards the Air Force base in Georgia somewhere. So there have been people reporting seeing, I don't know how they could identify it, but somehow people are talking about train cars full of coal fly ash being headed to Air Force bases.
That's another incredibly rich vein of research. If people want to go out there, want to go for the throat on this issue, follow the coal fly ash. I intend to do so. I'm just, completely overwhelmed with so much stuff that I have to look at. But if people want to go for the throat on this issue, follow the coal fly ash. I suggest that people read the paper that J. Marvin Herndon wrote. I don't have the title of it in front of me. It's in the book. It was retracted by the publication that published it. Probably completely political. I haven't heard any challenging of anything scientific that's in the paper, but it doesn't matter that it was retracted. What matters is that a famous PhD scientist who has a great track record and an incredibly huge Wikipedia listing, he came forward. And in this paper, he conducted scientific studies. He didn't even, basically the thesis of his paper is that he found the chemical signatures of coal fly ash and chemtrail spray that was collected from, I believe it was a HEPA filter, some type of HEPA filter where he collected the spray from. But it was basically he collected, maybe it was in a rainwater sample, but he says that in the paper, these chemical signatures are identical. And he wasn't even talking about aluminum, which is interesting. He didn't talk about aluminum. He talked about the second and third ingredients, which are barium and strontium. And this is more interesting because these are things that barium and strontium are not commonly found in our environment. That's why when you find a matching chemical signature, it's much more relevant to the investigation.
Right, there's not many things that we can think of that have a signature of barium and strontium, and thinking about
especially strontium.
Right. And I know that throughout history, mercury has poisoned people from coal fly ash, and mercury was found in San Francisco fog. But some say that that's a residual thing from coal burning before, but I'm kind of confused about that. So some suspect, I wrote about that last year. The San Francisco fog contains mercury, and well, what I've noticed is that this new mix that they've been spraying seems much more. It smells more like static electricity than the stuff before. The stuff before was powdery and starchy, and it seemed more like a raw type of less processed spray. But this stuff they're spraying now is much more irritating, much more just utterly irritating. Another thing I've noticed is that when I'm exposed to it for a while, and then I come back to this safe space of my room, well, I touch my phone and I can feel the radiation from my phone worse than before. And another thing I've noticed is that, well, when I've been exposed to it for a while, I go to the store, go out to do some things, and then I come home and I rub my skin, or my back especially. I get a sound that sounds like a graphite pencil, and it's not normal. It sounds just like a graphite pencil, like my skin is made of metal or something. And you mentioned in the book that nanoparticles can go through the skin as well.
Oh yeah, those nanoparticles, they go through everything. Well, I mean, not everything, but I mean, our bodies are quite porous, actually, relatively, and yeah, nanoparticles go right into you in all exposed areas.
Yeah.
They're super tiny little things. Because it actually goes micron size. Microns are absolutely tiny. I mean, like, you can barely see them. Nano size things are 1,000 times smaller than that.
1,000 times smaller.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking almost on the atomic level.
Wow, that is incredibly small. So, well, I guess that basically wraps it up, man. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
No, I think we just did a pretty good interview right there.
All right.